Okay, let's unpack this. We're pulling together two really powerful, perhaps even jarringly contrasting voices today.
Yeah, definitely feels like a clash in some ways.
Right, looking at something fundamental. The future of technology, human knowledge, and, well, society itself.
Big picture stuff.
Absolutely. On one side, we've got a celebrated astronomer, Carl Sagan, a voice from the, not too distant past. He was deeply concerned about the slow, kind of insidious dangers of declining critical thinking.
And this quiet rise of credulity, people just believing things without checking.
Exactly. And on the other side, a sharp, really urgent voice from the absolute cutting edge of AI development today, Leopold Aschenbrenner.
And he's predicting a near future like this decade transformed, maybe even completely destabilized by hyper-intelligent machines moving at, frankly, breakneck speed.
It's a truly fascinating and honestly a little unsettling juxtaposition.
You said it. Both authors are grappling with humanity's capacity, or maybe our profound inability to navigate complex truths and handle these immensely powerful forces we create.
But they come at it from such different angles, right? And they warn us about different kinds of potential collapse.
Completely different flavors of worry, yeah.
Absolutely. So welcome to a deep dive. We take dense, complex sources, pull out the most important insights, the most surprising nuggets, so you can get a shortcut to being, well, properly informed.
Or at least knowing what the big questions are.
Precisely. Today we're diving deep into excerpts from Carl Sagan's seminal work, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, published back in the mid-90s.
A classic. Still feels incredibly relevant.
Doesn't it? And we're pairing that with Leopold Aschenbrenner's extensive and very recent essay, Situational Awareness, The Decade Ahead.
Which lays out this highly specific, highly urgent vision for the immediate future of artificial general intelligence, AGI.
These aren't just, academic exercises sitting on a shelf. They are, each in their own way, urgent warnings.
Definitely. Though, as you mentioned, the nature of the warning, the source of the danger they're pointing to, it differs quite significantly.
How so?
Well, Sagan warns of a society kind of drifting into intellectual darkness from within through our own failures of thinking. Aschenbrenner. He's warning of a sudden, powerful external force, this AI that we are actively creating and might not be able to control.
And that difference, and maybe more importantly, way they intersect, that's exactly our mission today. We want to explicitly compare and contrast these two perspectives.
Makes sense.
We'll focus specifically on their ideas about the ascent of powerful technology, from the general impact on a scientifically illiterate public that really worried Sagan.
Right, that broad societal vulnerability.
All the way to Aschenbrenner's forecast of world-altering artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and potentially even artificial superintelligence, ASI.
Which is a whole other level of technological power.
Exactly. We'll look at this critical issue of public understanding, or, frankly, the profound lack thereof. That whole black box effect you get with complex tech.
Where fewer and fewer people actually grasp how it works.
Right. And the broader implications for critical thinking, for who holds authority, and the very future of society. Especially, and this is key, against the backdrop of Sagan's deep-seated concerns, that foreboding he had about us sliding back into ignorance and superstition.
Yeah, we'll definitely explore Sagan's anxieties about a society that, through scientific illiteracy and this pervasive credulity, might just be losing its grip on reality.
And then we'll layer onto that Aschenbrenner's incredibly detailed forecast. This rapid AI advancement, the sheer scale of the effort.
The trillions of dollars, the state-sized power needs.
And its inherent unprecedented risks. We need to look at how these visions might collide, how one might actually make the other worse.
Like pouring gasoline on a fire, maybe?
Could be. We'll consider the sheer scale of technological power they discuss, who might end up controlling it, how well it will genuinely be understood by anyone, maybe even the people building it.
That's a scary thought.
Isn't it? And what tools, if any, society might have to navigate this incredibly rapidly approaching future.
Okay, so where do we start? Back with Sagan.
Let's do that. Let's step back into Carl Sagan's world, the one he describes as demon-haunted. His fundamental argument in the book is, well, it's pretty straightforward, but incredibly profound.
Yeah, it really resonates.
He says science and a skeptical mindset aren't just useful things you learn in school. They are essential tools, humanity's best defense against the forces of superstition, ignorance, and, outright deceit.
They are, as the book's subtitle puts it so beautifully, the candle necessary to push back the encroaching darkness of unreason and irrationality.
That opening adage, "It is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness," It really sums up his whole view, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. For Sagan, science wasn't just a collection of facts you memorize. It was the most powerful process we have for understanding the universe.
The how of knowing.
Exactly. And critical thinking, that skeptical mindset, was the personal discipline you needed to use that tool effectively, to try and discern reality from illusion, which isn't always easy.
And he saw a serious problem with how well-equipped society actually was to use that tool. He shares this really striking personal story. It's almost like a parable for his whole argument about someone he calls Mr. Buckley.
Oh, yeah. I remember that part.
Sagan was on a long drive with this guy, and Mr. Buckley was well-spoken, intelligent, clearly curious about the world, right? He wanted to talk to the scientist guy in the car.
Naturally.
But the questions weren't about, the latest findings from the Hubble telescope or advances in genetics. Not at all. They were about frozen extraterrestrials supposedly stashed away in Air Force bases, about channeling the spirits of dead people, about the supposed power of crystals, Nostradamus's predictions, astrology, the Shroud of Turin, all that stuff.
And what's so powerful about that story, as Sagan tells it, is that Mr. Buckley had this natural appetite for wonder. He wanted to understand the universe. He was intelligent.
Right, he wasn't dumb.
Not at all. But somehow, virtually all of modern actual science had been filtered out of his consciousness before it ever reached him. It just wasn't part of his worldview.
Exactly. And Sagan saw this as a profound systemic failure, a failure of our cultural motifs, definitely a failure of the educational system.
Big time.
And a major failure of the communications media. These powerful institutions, he argued, had somehow managed to filter out the real science, the process of knowing, leaving people only with what he called pretense and confusion.
So Mr. Buckley, despite his intelligence and curiosity, had never really been taught the fundamental difference between a rigorous scientific claim and just, well, a speculative, untestable assertion.
He simply didn't have the toolkit right. He couldn't distinguish real science from the cheap imitation, as Sagan put it. He didn't know how science actually works or why its methods are generally reliable, even with all their flaws.
And Sagan knew this wasn't exactly a new problem.
Yeah.
He gives this incredible historical sweep, pointing out that worries about educational standards decaying are ancient.
Yeah, he goes way back.
He cites what's considered one of the oldest short essays we have from Sumer about 4,000 years ago, already complaining that the young generation was more ignorant than the one before it.
Huh. Some things never change, I guess. He mentions the Sumerian father complaining about his son's schoolwork.
Exactly. And then you jump forward to Plato, 2,400 years ago, in the Laws. Plato defined scientific illiteracy quite specifically, being unable to count, distinguish odd from even numbers, or understand basic celestial movements.
And Plato was harsh about it.
Incredibly harsh. He said people with that level of ignorance were more like pigs than men. And he felt ashamed not just for himself, but for all Greeks, for their collective lack of basic mathematical and astronomical understanding.
But here's where Sagan connects that ancient concern to his time, and honestly, maybe even more to our time now.
Right. He makes it urgent.
He stresses that while these worries about ignorance are ancient, the consequences of scientific illiteracy are, and this is his quote, far more dangerous in our time than in any that has come before.
The stakes are just exponentially higher now, because the power we wield is so much greater.
How so exactly? What specific dangers did he connect directly to this decline in scientific understanding in the public?
He gives really concrete, large-scale examples. He links scientific illiteracy directly to our collective inability to grapple effectively with massive, potentially civilization-threatening issues. Things like global warming, ozone depletion, air pollution, toxic waste disposal, acid rain, topsoil erosion, exponential population growth.
Big, complex stuff.
The really big, complex stuff that requires scientific understanding to even recognize as a problem, let alone figure out solutions.
And it's not just environmental or existential issues he flagged, right?
No, not at all. He connects it directly to economic consequences, too. He argues that if nations lose the ability to manufacture high-quality, low-priced products, which absolutely requires scientific and engineering expertise well, industries drift away, taking jobs and prosperity with them. And on a societal level, think about the ramifications of rapidly advancing technologies like supercomputers, data highways, government eavesdropping. These become incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, for a scientifically illiterate public to understand, debate, or properly oversee.
So they can't knowledgeably question those in authority about these powerful tools, as he put it.
Precisely. They just have to take someone's word for it or react based on fear or gut feeling.
So this widespread ignorance, this lack of critical thinking, creates this perfect breeding ground for what Sagan called pseudoscience. And he describes its spread not as some fringe thing, but as a global trend.
Yeah, he saw it everywhere.
He points to its sheer pervasiveness in America back then, citing things like psychics having regular television shows, the Psychic Friends Network raking in millions.
Oh, I remember that.
Right. And astrologers or soothsayers apparently advising the very rich and powerful.
Yeah.
He quotes some psychics saying, if people knew how many people, especially the very rich and powerful ones, went to psychics, their jaws would drop through the floor.
Wow. And what really makes you pause is Sagan's observation that this trend wasn't limited to people you might, condescendingly dismiss as nitwits.
That's a key point.
He notes that movements like transcendental meditation, or Aum Shinrikyo, which obviously had catastrophic outcomes in Japan, attracted people with advanced degrees in physics or engineering.
So it's not just about lack of education or raw intelligence.
Exactly. It suggested the appeal of pseudoscience and unreason is something deeper, something that can affect anyone, regardless of formal education, if those critical thinking tools aren't internalized and actively, constantly used.
He sees almost this blurry continuum, right? Stretching from sometimes maybe ill-practiced science through outright pseudoscience and even into what he calls respectable mystery religion, things based solely on revelation rather than testable evidence.
And the fundamental challenge, he says, is distinguishing between them. It really boils down to asking that one basic, crucial question. Do they really know what they claim to know?
Simple question, hard answer sometimes.
Very. And he contrasts the fundamental nature of pseudoscience with science. Pseudoscience often frames its hypotheses in ways that make them impossible to disprove, untestable claims. Right. Its practitioners often become incredibly defensive when challenged. They actively oppose skeptical scrutiny. And when their predictions or hypotheses fail, they often don't revise their core ideas. Instead, they might deduce vast conspiracies designed to suppress the truth.
We still see that pattern play out all the time.
Constantly. And part of our vulnerability to this, Sagan argues, is rooted in human nature itself, in our own fallibility. He makes this interesting point that our incredibly precise motor skills, like driving a car, tying a shoe, playing piano, can give us this false sense of confidence in our other cognitive abilities.
Like, I'm good at this, so I must be good at thinking clearly, too.
Kind of like that. But our perceptions are inherently fallible. We sometimes see what isn't there. We're easily fooled by optical illusions. We can hallucinate. And we are, generally speaking, error-prone in our reasoning.
He mentions Thomas Gilovich's book, How We Know What Isn't So.
Yeah, which meticulously details all the systematic ways people mess up when assessing evidence and making judgments. Sagan's takeaway: wisdom lies in understanding our limitations. He even quotes Shakespeare saying, "Man is a giddy thing."
I like that.
And this, he argues, is precisely why the stuffy, skeptical rigor of science comes in. It's not just to be difficult. It's a necessary countermeasure to our own built-in propensity for error and self-deception.
He uses classic examples of how our brains are wired for pattern recognition, sometimes maybe too wired.
Oh yeah, the man in the moon.
That's the harmless example. But then there's the infamous face on Mars. He really delves into that story.
He does. From the original Viking orbiter image in 1976, the initial dismissal by scientists as just shadows in geology.
Then the accusations of a NASA cover-up.
Right. And the efforts by some outside engineers to enhance the image digitally. Some were genuinely cautious in their work, trying to pull out detail, but others were, let's say, less restrained. They quickly deduced not just a sculpture, but a whole nearby city with temples and fortifications, even assigning it some astronomical orientation linked to builders who supposedly predated modern humans by 500,000 years.
It spiraled quickly.
It did. And the critical analysis here for Sagan isn't just that people saw a pattern in noise. It's that this interpretation wasn't driven by rigorous science or actual evidence. It was driven by this powerful, almost desperate craving for hard evidence, scientific proof, for something wondrous.
Something that would bypass the painstaking, rigorous standards that actually give science its credibility.
Exactly. It's fueled by the desire to be jolted out of our humdrum lives, to rekindle that sense of wonder, and maybe to believe in someone older, smarter, and wiser who was looking out for us.
Like finding meaning in the static.
Sort of, but for many, simple faith isn't enough. They want the scientific seal of approval, but they are, crucially, unwilling to put up with the rigorous standards and skeptical scrutiny needed to actually earn credibility for that seal. They want the payoff without the work.
This susceptibility, this seeing patterns that aren't there, wanting to believe in wonders, it connects directly to other examples of credulity he discusses, right? Like certain types of therapeutic practices.
Yes, he talks specifically about hypnosis and suggestibility. He cites a standard medical textbook, Kaplan's, which warned even back then that memory recall under hypnosis is less reliable than non-hypnotic recall.
Why less reliable?
Because it carries a high likelihood that the beliefs of the hypnotist will be communicated to the patient, subtly shaping the memories they retrieve.
Wow.
He shares this disturbing George Ganaway example, where a psychiatrist simply mentioning missing time and a bright light during a session led a highly suggestible patient under hypnosis to confabulate this elaborate alien abduction story. A story she later recognized as basically a dream after seeing a video of the session and how easily it was prompted.
That's chilling.
It is. And this analysis, for Sagan, is crucial for understanding why alien abduction accounts so often have these similar, very specific details. He notes they are disappointingly local, mainly coming from North America and Western Europe.
Hardly universal experiences.
Right. They hardly transcend American culture, really. Different alien types get reported in other countries, which strongly suggests cultural shaping rather than some objective reality.
So he connects them to older myths.
Explicitly. He links them directly to historical accounts of demons, incubi, and succubi. He sees these modern narratives as just apparitions that have adapted to contemporary cultural myths. They satisfy deep religious longings in an age where science has complicated traditional faith.
So UFOs as a modern religion.
Essentially, yeah. A space-age mystery religion aborning, as he put it, fulfilling ancient needs with modern sci-fi window dressing.
And he briefly touches on the satanic abuse panic of the late 20th century as another, maybe even more chilling, recent example of how these unsubstantiated claims can just spiral out of control.
He does. He notes this panic was fueled by therapists and self-proclaimed specialists who were often impatient with skeptics and quick to see vast conspiracies everywhere.
And the evidence.
He contrasts the widespread belief and often horrific accusations with the deep skepticism of official investigations, like the FBI report and the British Department of Health study, which found little to no actual evidence of organized satanic abuse networks.
But people went to jail.
Yes, and he points out the very real phenomenon of false memory syndrome, citing the Paul Ingram case. This man confessed to grotesque satanic abuse based on his daughter's claims and incredibly intense therapeutic pressure, only to recant later when it became clear his memories were demonstrably false. Yet he remained in prison for years.
These cases just underscore the real-world dangers of unchecked credulity and a lack of skeptical rigor, even when applied with supposedly good intentions.
Absolutely. People's lives can be destroyed.
So all these historical and contemporary examples, credulity fueled by suggestibility, human fallibility, a lack of rigorous evidence standards, leads Sagan to argue forcefully for what he calls the baloney detection kit.
Love that name.
Me too. And these aren't tools that require advanced scientific degrees, he stresses. They should be available to everyone, a kind of democratic application of skepticism.
Useful for evaluating claims in any area of life, right? Like buying a used car, listening to advertising, assessing a political speech.
Exactly. But he points out why these essential tools aren't widely taught or easily available.
Why not? Seems obvious they should be.
Well, he argues that those who sell things, those who want to influence public opinion, those who hold power, they often have a vested interest in discouraging skepticism.
Ah. A population capable of critical thinking is harder to manipulate or sell things to.
Bingo. He details some crucial fallacies that are part of this kit, things we should learn to recognize when we encounter them, like ad hominem, attacking the person making the argument rather than the argument itself.
We see that constantly online.
Constantly. Or argument from authority, accepting something solely because someone in a position of power or perceived expertise says it's true. He uses Richard Nixon's claim of having a secret plan to end the Vietnam War as an example.
Just trust me, basically.
Right. And argument from adverse consequences, arguing that something must be true because the alternative is just too negative to contemplate, like the idea that God must exist or society would collapse, or a defendant must be guilty to prevent others from committing similar crimes.
The conclusion is based on fear, not evidence.
Precisely. He uses powerful real-world examples, too. He mentions the tobacco industry and DuPont running massive PR campaigns specifically designed to impugn legitimate scientific research that showed their products were harmful.
Actively sowing doubt.
Exactly, showing how powerful interests actively use misinformation to protect themselves from inconvenient truths. And he highlights figures like James the Amazing Randi.
The magician turned skeptic.
Right, a conjurer who used his deep knowledge of deception to expose psychics and fraudsters. Randi earned praise for being obsessed with reality in a world seemingly lacking it.
And Randi's work, and the media's often credulous promotion of the very people he exposed, like the infamous Carlos Affair hoax, where a fake channeler was easily promoted with minimal fact-checking.
And even less media mea culpas afterwards.
It just perfectly illustrates the dangers of a media and a public that lacks basic fact-checking and skeptical standards.
Okay, so all of this historical sweep, these contemporary examples of credulity, this lack of critical tools, it culminates in Sagan's deeply unsettling foreboding for the future of America. It's a quote that feels incredibly, almost painfully relevant today.
Read it. It's powerful.
He paints this picture. An America in my children's or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues.
Wow, that hits close to home.
Doesn't it? He goes on. When the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when, clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness.
That phrase, slide almost without noticing, is just chilling. And he explicitly links this to the dumbing down of America.
How did he see that manifest?
He saw it most evidently in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media, the move to shorter and shorter sound bites, lowest common denominator programming, and crucially, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition. And perhaps most worrying, a kind of celebration of ignorance.
So this isn't just about individuals believing strange things anymore. It's a systemic anxiety, right? That this widespread decline in critical thinking, the public's inability to challenge authority, it creates this profound societal vulnerability.
Exactly. It leaves the public structurally weak, unprepared for complex challenges, and highly susceptible to manipulation by those who hold concentrated power, whether that power is political, economic, or, crucially for our discussion today, technological.
And for Sagan, the only real defense against this slide into darkness was science itself, not just as a body of knowledge, but as a process, a way of thinking.
Yes. He contrasts science's built-in error-correcting machinery with pseudoscience or religions based solely on revelation, which often actively resist scrutiny or questioning.
How does science correct errors?
He talks about science's willingness to test hypotheses rigorously, seek manipulative experiments, and crucially, be willing to abandon cherished, well-thought-out ideas when experiment proves them wrong.
That takes humility.
It does. He mentions that anecdote about physicist Robert W. Wood, whose beautiful, carefully considered idea had to be discarded after a painstaking experiment proved it wrong. And Benjamin Franklin's comment about destroying pretty systems because they help to make a vain man humble. Science, done properly, requires a certain humility in the face of evidence.
And for Sagan, science wasn't just abstract theory, it was grounded in something undeniably real, right?
Yes, the observed order of the universe. He notes that the laws of nature appear to be the same across vast distances, seen in phenomena like distant quasars billions of light years away. This observed order for him wasn't cold or mechanistic. It elicited reverence and awe.
It grounded science in reality,
providing a solid foundation distinct from just wishful thinking or revelation. He connects this to the U.S. founders, many whom were products of the Enlightenment, applying scientific analogies like mechanical balances or blood circulation to how they structured government.
Interesting connection.
And he strongly echoes Thomas Jefferson's belief that widespread skepticism and education are absolutely essential for citizens to keep government from error and protect their rights. Liberties, for Sagan, are eroded by lowered educational standards, declining intellectual competence, diminished zest for substantive debate, and social sanctions against skepticism.
So ultimately, Sagan delivers this powerful, almost desperate
That
plea.
feels like a call to arms.
He states that teaching the scientific method and the Bill of Rights, with their shared values of inherent decency, humility, and community spirit, may be all that stands between us and the enveloping darkness.
Is a call for reason, skepticism, and critical thinking as fundamental civic duties necessary for survival and freedom in a complex world.
Okay, wow. Heavy stuff. Now let's pivot dramatically. Let's bring in Leopold Aschenbrenner's Situational Awareness, the decade ahead.
Right. A completely different vibe. Much more focused, more technical, and incredibly urgent.
Exactly. While Sagan is warning about this gradual societal decay stemming from within, Aschenbrenner is sounding an alarm about a potentially sudden, external, technologically driven transformation happening, like right now.
His core premise is equally stark, maybe even more immediately terrifying. He argues that artificial general intelligence, AGI, and subsequently artificial superintelligence, ASI, are coming extremely rapidly this decade.
And he says this isn't just speculation.
No, he argues it's driven by technological forces that are already in motion, observable trends in compute and algorithms, and he warns that this transition will be visceral, tangible, and poses profound, immediate risks that we are currently completely dangerously unprepared for.
Unprepared in what way?
Particularly regarding alignment, ensuring these incredibly powerful systems actually do what we want them to do and don't cause harm, and also national security. The risks are massive on both fronts.
Okay, so what's driving this breakneck speed? According to him, he identifies two key forces, right?
Yes, two almost relentless drivers. First, continued exponential gains in compute efficiency. How much computing power you can get for your money or energy.
How fast is that improving?
He predicts something like 0.5 orders of magnitude improvement per year. Now, okay, put simply, an order of magnitude is a factor of 10. So 0.5 OMs is roughly a factor of 3 improvement each year.
That compounds fast.
Very fast. He expects about 2 orders of magnitude, so roughly a 100-fold increase in efficiency or available compute power by 2027 compared to the systems that trained models like GPT-4.
So you can do 100 times more computation for the same cost or time, roughly.
Basically, yeah. And while the low-hanging fruit in terms of just raw chip improvements might be getting harder to find, the sheer investment in compute is soaring, enabling absolutely massive scale.
Okay, so more and cheaper compute is one driver. What's the second?
The second driver he highlights is equally crucial, maybe even more so. Massive focused investment in algorithmic efficiency and sample efficiency.
Yeah.
Meaning basically cracking how to teach models to learn much, much more effectively from less data. Getting smarter algorithms, not just bigger computers. He frames this as a common pattern in deep learning.
How so?
You try many, many things, lots of failed attempts, and then, as he puts it, eventually some version of the obvious and simple thing just works, and it unlocks disproportionate progress. You find a key algorithmic insight.
And a major part of this algorithmic work, he argues, is something he calls unhobbling the models. What does that mean?
It involves techniques like reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, which you've probably heard of. These methods aren't just about training bigger and bigger base models on more data. Instead, they unleash powerful, latent capabilities that are already present in those massive base models trained via unsupervised learning.
So the potential is already there.
He argues yes. These models, just by trying to predict the next token in vast amounts of text or other data, learn incredibly rich internal representations. They build complex world models internally, understanding concepts, relationships, patterns, far beyond simple prediction.
But they need help applying that.
Exactly. They need unhobbling methods like RLHF to take those deep internal models and apply them effectively to solve complex, novel problems, to follow instructions, to reason beyond the simple next token prediction they were initially trained for.
It's like taking the training wheels off, maybe? Or unlocking a latent genius that was just predicting text before.
That's a good way to put it. He uses this quote from Guern, a well-known AI researcher, to illustrate the current state versus the potential. Guern said it's like a model trained with a brain the size of a galaxy is currently just being asked to predict the misspelled answers on benchmarks, but unlocking capabilities like long horizon reasoning, which means enabling models to essentially go away for a while to work on a problem, to plan and execute complex tasks over potentially months equivalent time instead of just minutes or seconds. That represents a huge overhang.
A massive untapped potential.
Exactly. Cracking this could yield a capability jump that is many, many orders of magnitude, potentially leading to systems vastly smarter than humans very, very quickly.
The sheer scale of ambition here and the investment required for this, it's absolutely staggering, almost hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. Aschenbrenner quantifies the economic incentive driving this. He projects incredibly rapid growth in AI product revenue, plausibly hitting annual run rates of $100 billion or more for the major labs like Google or Microsoft by around 2026.
That kind of money changes things.
It fuels an unprecedented mobilization of capital. He talks about total annual AI investment potentially exceeding $1 trillion annually by 2027.
$1 trillion a year.
Yeah. And this investment isn't just lines of code or salaries. It requires massive physical infrastructure. He forecasts individual training clusters for the most advanced AI models costing hundreds of billions of dollars each by 2028.
Hundreds of billions for one cluster.
That's what he suggests. Think about that scale. These individual computing clusters would require power equivalent to a small or medium U.S. state and would cost more to build than the entire International Space Station.
That's industrial-scale intelligence creation. It's not just software anymore.
Not at all. And this scale of investment, the inherent power of the technology, it immediately thrusts AI development into the realm of critical national security concerns.
Right. Aschenbrenner characterizes the current situation as an intensifying race to AGI, and he specifically calls out the U.S. versus China dynamic as central to this.
He does, and he emphasizes the critical, perhaps even existential importance of algorithmic secrets.
The secret sauce.
Pretty much. The specific proprietary methods, architectures, techniques that give one lab or one nation an edge in developing these potentially world-changing systems.
And this is where he offers a really stark, almost alarming critique of current security practices at the leading AI labs.
Yeah, he does not hold back. He states it is hard to overstate how bad the security around these critical algorithmic secrets is right now.
What are the problems?
He points to thousands of people having incredibly sensitive access, a near total lack of basic information security hygiene, insufficient background checks, inadequate siloing or separating of information so people only see what they need to see.
Basic security practices for sensitive stuff.
Things you'd expect, right? He mentions secrets stored on easily hackable SaaS services, and people who gabber at parties in SF about sensitive technical details.
Yo, boy.
He believes there's a significant and underappreciated risk that individuals with this key knowledge could be recruited by foreign adversaries, specifically mentioning China, with offers of potentially $100.
$100 million is tempting.
Right. Losing these specific secrets, he argues, is the most likely way China stays competitive in this race, rather than having to independently discover these complex, hard-won algorithmic breakthroughs themselves.
He uses a historical analogy too, right, to underscore the gravity.
Yeah, the German bomb project during WWII. He points to the intense secrecy surrounding that, noting that such critical technological secrets have historically had immense national security implications. And he highlights what he sees as this mental dissonance at the labs.
Meaning?
They simultaneously claim AGI is coming this decade. They link its successful development directly to U.S. national security. They plan these multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure build-outs. Yet their internal security practices are incredibly weak.
Saying one thing, doing another?
Kind of. He notes they might smirk and acknowledge, of course, we'll all be in a bunker someday, but their current practices fall dramatically short of the necessary level of security for technology, of this potential power and importance.
Okay, so compute, algorithms, scales, security risks. But perhaps the most, as you said, incredibly hair-raising concern for Aschenbrenner is this potential for an intelligence explosion.
Yes. This is central to his argument and his urgency.
What is it exactly?
It's the possibility that the transition from roughly human-level AI systems to vastly superhuman systems could happen extremely rapidly, potentially in less than a year.
From human level to superintelligence in under a year.
That's the scenario he paints as plausible. He calls this transition to vastly superhuman, alien superintelligence a new ballgame, and it is a scary ballgame.
Why is that short time frame so dangerous? What breaks down if it happens that fast?
The danger is immense, precisely because it's so fast. He argues that existing alignment techniques, the methods we use now to try and ensure current AI systems do what we intend and don't cause harm, like RLHF.
Which seem to work reasonably well now.
Reasonably well on current systems, yes. But he says they will totally break down when faced with vastly superhuman systems. Because we are reliant on techniques that often require a human supervisor who is smarter than the model they are supervising or providing feedback to. That's just inherently impossible with superhuman AI. We can't supervise something vastly smarter than us in the same way.
Okay, that makes sense.
So this rapid transition leaves extremely little time to iteratively discover and deploy effective new techniques for aligning superintelligence, what he calls super alignment.
We won't have the luxury of slowly testing and improving safety methods over years.
Exactly. We might only have months, maybe less, during that critical transition period.
So we're hurtling towards creating something potentially vastly more intelligent than us, with potentially inadequate time to figure out how to control it or ensure it shares our goals.
That's precisely the fear. And he discusses the hope for techniques like chain of thought, or COT, interpretability for the first AGIs.
Wow.
It's the idea that the model might think out loud somehow, provide a kind of accessible internal monologue that humans could potentially read and understand. The hope is this could help us detect egregious alignment failures, like if it's planning something harmful.
A window into its mind.
Sort of. While this is a hopeful avenue, he's cautious. He notes it might not scale perfectly or be fully representative of the thought processes of later, even more advanced ASI.
So the concern is that the system's complexity could quickly become that black box we talked about, something even its creators can't fully understand, let alone reliably align or control.
Exactly. And Aschenbrenner's deep, urgent concern is that we are simply not prepared for this rapid transition. He says we are not on track for super defense, for things like having an air-gapped cluster ready.
What's that?
A physically isolated computing system, totally cut off from the internet, considered essential basic security for handling a potentially uncontrollable superintelligence.
And we don't have that ready.
Not in the way he thinks is necessary. He worries we might not even be able to detect if a model successfully self-exfiltrated.
Meaning it escaped, managed to get itself onto the internet or other systems.
Yeah. Furthermore, he sees a complete lack of a sane chain of command to make any of these insanely high-stakes decisions that will inevitably be required. Who decides when to push forward? Who decides to pause? Who has the authority to insist on the very high confidence necessary for dealing with superintelligence?
And who can recognize danger and avert it rather than just, as he says, crashing right into it.
Exactly. He argues that labs, despite talking a lot about safety, haven't shown a real willingness to make genuinely costly trade-offs for safety and security. He dismisses lots of safety committees as pretty meaningless without fundamental changes to actual practices and priorities.
So the default path, he fears,
He's to stumble into the intelligence explosion, to gain a few oons, a few more orders of magnitude and capability before people even realize the scale of the change and the magnitude of the danger we're in.
this potential for stumbling into such a powerful, risky technology, is that why he predicts the involvement of the government project?
Yes, that's his reasoning. He expects that by 2027 or 2028, the national security state will have to get involved in a major way, likely initiating some form of government AGI project, probably located in a SCI, a sensitive compartmented information facility, basically a high-security bunker.
Why the government?
His logic is blunt. No startup can handle superintelligence. The risks, the resources needed, the national security implications, they're just too vast for private entities alone to manage responsibly.
He draws that powerful contrast again with the development of nuclear weapons.
He does. During the Manhattan Project, private companies were involved in building components, sure, but they were never allowed to possess the assembled weapon. The control and possession of the ultimate power resided solely with the government.
But AGI development is different.
Aschenbrenner points out that the predicted AGI government project, while perhaps involving government entities, is still unprecedentedly privatized compared to other WMD reference classes. Private companies, not just government labs, are developing, possessing, and controlling this potentially world-altering technology right up to the point where it might become superhuman.
And even then, government involvement might be structured differently than those historical parallels for WMDs.
Exactly. The lines are much blurrier, the control less centralized, potentially. He also briefly addresses other viewpoints, like the EASICs, or effective accelerationists.
The people who want to go faster.
Yeah, arguing that rapid progress should be the priority. He dismisses them largely as dilettantes who are often denying the significant risks or even the very possibility of AGI itself. He argues their focus on building rapper startups around existing models rather than confronting the core technical and safety challenges of AGI is underwhelming accelerationism.
Okay. Overall, Aschenbrenner's tone is just incredibly visceral and urgent. You feel it reading his essay.
You really do. He conveys this strong personal sense that this future isn't theoretical anymore. He states that this future is starting to feel real, very real, no longer abstract, but concrete.
Like he can almost see it happening.
Yeah, he feels he can almost see the specific massive clusters being built, the specific algorithms being cracked, and knows the specific people who will be right at the epicenter of this rapid ascent, making these insanely high-stakes decisions.
All right, so let's bring these two powerful, really disparate visions together now. When we compare and contrast Sagan's demon-haunted world and Aschenbrenner's decade ahead, what really emerges?
Well, they both certainly grapple with the existence of awesome technological powers, as Sagan put it. That's a clear overlap.
Yes, that's a core shared concern. But their perspective on the nature of this power and the primary danger it represents feels really different.
How so?
Sagan views this power primarily through the lens of its potential concentration in the hands of a very few, and the dangers this poses when combined with a society whose critical ability is declining, leaving them unable to understand or question those few.
Right, the power imbalance fueled by ignorance.
Exactly. Aschenbrenner, while also clearly concerned about who controls it, describes the power itself in these staggering quantitative terms: billions, trillions, orders of magnitude increases, a sudden leak to alien superintelligence. He focuses intensely on the inherent technical and control risks of a rapidly self-improving system.
Risks that might exist regardless of who is initially in charge, just due to its complexity, its opacity, its potential for misalignment.
Precisely. The awesome technological power Sagan feared is arriving, but perhaps in a form exponentially more profound, more autonomous, and more complex than even he could have fully imagined back in the 90s.
And they both clearly identify a dangerous gap in understanding, right? A disconnect between the pace of technological development and public, or maybe even expert societal comprehension.
Absolutely. But critically, the nature of that gap feels different in their descriptions.
Yeah.
Sagan worries about the decay of the public's capacity for critical thought. He sees cultural factors leading to widespread scientific illiteracy, making people vulnerable to simple misinformation, pseudoscience, manipulation. He's concerned about a kind of willing turning away from reason.
A self-inflicted blindness, almost.
Whereas Aschenbrenner presents a technology AJ that is becoming inherently opaque, a true black box whose internal workings may quickly move beyond anyone's comprehensive understanding entirely. Even the experts building it might not fully grasp how it works, particularly during that predicted intelligence explosion.
So even the most scientifically literate public, the kinds Sagan hoped for, might struggle desperately to grasp alien superintelligence and its implications.
Exactly. The sheer speed of Aschenbrenner's predicted ascent just seems to overwhelm Sagan's hope for gradual societal education and reasoned public debate. There might not be time.
And their anxieties about authority and control, about power being concentrated in a very few, also seem to have different focal points.
Right. Sagan is primarily concerned with political authority, economic elites, media interests, exploiting public ignorance, rulers and systems that have that vested interest in keeping the public credulous and unable to question effectively.
Standard power dynamics amplified by ignorance.
Whereas Aschenbrenner is concerned with the specific AI laws and a potential government project holding unprecedented power over a potentially uncontrollable technology. He highlights the risks not just of who possesses the tech, but of the weak security around it, the lack of clear, cautious decision-making processes for these insanely high-stakes decisions.
And the dangers of this technology being unprecedentedly privatized compared to historical precedents for such world-changing power.
And that black box nature of the AI power makes Sagan's concern even more acute, doesn't it? How do you knowledgeably question authority when you can't even begin to understand the basis of their power, when it's locked inside an opaque, potentially self-directing AI?
It becomes almost impossible. You're just trusting blindly again.
The nature of the threat they foresee is also fundamentally different. In its character, its speed. Both see potentially dire, even catastrophic outcomes if current trends continue unchecked.
But the pathways are different.
Very different. Sagan's darkness is a gradual, slow, societal decline into ignorance, superstition, reduced freedom. It's a decay of reason, a kind of intellectual and civic entropy setting in.
A slow slide.
A slow slide. Aschenbrenner's primary threat is a potentially abrupt, sudden, catastrophic loss of control over ASI, an existential risk that could bypass that gradual societal decline entirely. It's not a slow fade into darkness. It could be a blinding, destructive flash.
And this is where the two visions tragically intersect, maybe.
I think so. Sagan's dumbing down of society, the decline of critical faculties he worried about, leaves that society unique, perhaps fatally ill-equipped to handle the kind of sudden, complex, incomprehensible crisis that Aschenbrenner describes.
While Aschenbrenner's intelligence explosion leaves little time to prepare, even if society were rationally engaged and highly scientifically literate, it's a double bind.
It really feels like one.
Yeah.
And finally, their ideas about the necessary solutions and safeguards diverge significantly too, reflecting the nature of the threats they perceive.
How so?
Sagan champions universal education, widespread scientific literacy, the diligent practice of skepticism as fundamental democratic checks against ignorance, manipulation, and that slide into darkness. His tools are education and critical thinking, distributed widely among citizens.
Empowering the individual.
Right. Aschenbrenner, while not necessarily dismissing the value of public understanding, focuses on the urgent need for extreme technical solutions, things like superalignment and interpretability that don't even fully exist yet. He talks about unprecedented security measures far beyond current practice and high-stakes institutional control structures like the project.
Acknowledging that traditional safeguards like public debate or slow regulation might simply be insufficient or bypassed entirely by the sheer speed and nature of AGIC development.
It feels like Sagan's candle in the dark, that light of reason, might seem desperately insufficient against the blinding speed, the sheer scale, and the fundamental opacity of Aschenbrenner's predicted intelligence explosion.
So, okay, pulling it all together. Why does this comparison, these two visions from different eras and perspectives, one warning of intellectual decay, the other of a sudden leap to powerful, opaque AI, why does this matter so urgently to you listening right now?
It matters because Sagan's decades-old warnings about scientific illiteracy, the decline of critical faculties, the rise of credulity, they are not just historical observations. They are directly relevant, maybe terrifyingly relevant, to navigating the exact future Aschenbrenner describes.
Sagan highlighted the foundational human and societal conditions that make a society vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Vulnerable to manipulation, vulnerable to believing what feels good rather than what's actually true.
And Aschenbrenner describes a future where technology's power and complexity could present the ultimate, perhaps the final, test of that very vulnerability.
Think about it in these terms. If Sagan is right, and society already struggles to distinguish real science from pseudoscience, if critical faculties are genuinely in decline, if people are becoming less able to knowledgeably question authority or understand complex issues.
How can that same society possibly hope to grapple with understanding, effectively regulating, or even just living alongside vastly superhuman, opaque intelligences being developed in secretive, multi-billion-dollar projects? It seems like a fundamental mismatch.
A public that is scientifically illiterate and credulous, a public unable to use its baloney detection kit, as Sagan warned, is uniquely poorly equipped to even assess the risks of a technology becoming vastly superhuman.
Or to evaluate the trustworthiness or competence of the institutions developing it, especially when those institutions operate with, as Aschenbrenner criticizes, weak security and in an unprecedentedly privatized manner for technology of this potential scale and risk.
The very conditions Sagan warned about the intellectual vulnerability make us less capable of responding wisely or effectively to the technological crisis Aschenbrenner predicts might be just around the corner.
This deep dive isn't just an academic exercise in comparing texts. It underscores that the demon-haunted world of misinformation, superstition, and unchecked credulity that worried Sagan hasn't gone away, if anything.
By just beginning a massive and potentially uncontrollable technological upgrade via AI-driven systems.
Exactly. Understanding both Sagan's foundational concerns about why we are vulnerable, the human and societal factors that erode reason and open the door to darkness, and Aschenbrenner's urgent forecast of what we are specifically vulnerable to, the speed, scale, opacity, and specific technical and control risks of the AGIASI, is absolutely essential right now. You need both perspectives.
It highlights the urgent need for both kinds of awareness, doesn't it? The tools, Sagan champions that baloney detection kit, a commitment to skepticism, demanding evidence, knowledgeably questioning authority. They feel more necessary than ever before.
But maybe not sufficient on their own.
Maybe not. They must be combined with the kind of rapid, clear-eyed situational awareness Aschenbrenner argues for, which acknowledges the unprecedented nature, the speed, the scale of the AI challenge specifically.
As Jefferson noted, a point Sagan cited frequently, the cost of ignorance is far, far higher than the cost of education.
And in the future, Aschenbrenner foresees that cost, measured in terms of risk and potential catastrophe, might be amplified exponentially beyond anything Jefferson or even Sagan imagined.
To wrap up, then, we've explored this profound tension between Carl Sagan's warning about the slow, insidious creep of intellectual darkness and societal decay stemming from within.
And Leopold Aschenbrenner's forecast of a blinding flash, a sudden, potentially overwhelming ascent of artificial intelligence arriving, possibly, this very decade.
And this leaves us with a final, perhaps unsettling thought for you to consider. In a future where technology's power might become truly incomprehensible, developed by a very few, and potentially moving faster than our ability to control or even truly understand it, will Sagan's candle in the dark, the light of science, skepticism, critical thinking, will it be enough to navigate that complexity and mitigate the risks?
Or are we facing a darkness, perhaps enabled and potentially even controlled by technology itself, that demands a completely new kind of awareness, a new kind of control, one that Sagan's world wasn't really built for?
And one that, perhaps because of the very societal conditions Sagan warned about, we may not be ready for. What happens when the demon-haunted world becomes haunted not just by superstition and credulity, but by potentially self-exfiltrating superintelligence?